All right, thanks everyone who has joined so far. This is the webinar on social media and storytelling, your toolkit for talent engagement. Today, specifically, we're going to talk about not only having a social media presence, but also being purposeful on social media. So to kick us off, we can do introductions. My name is Kat Lynn. I manage the marketing for Universum across the Americas. And I'm here with Amelia.
Hi, I'm Amelia Pardue, and I'm the head of digital media and activations for the Americas. So we work with a lot of our clients in exactly what we're going to be talking about today, managing their social media presence and managing the activation of their employer brand on digital channels.
So a lot of what we do, for those of you who know Universum, a lot of what we do is data-driven. And we have a lot of data, a lot of insights into what's attractive to talent and what's important to them about your employer brand. But a big question we get a lot of times is, what do you do with that information? Once you kind of learn what your talent wants, how do you actually get your message in front of them and go from understanding and having a strategy to actually getting that in front of people, it's important. It impacts the bottom line and makes sure that you're hiring the best people for your company, all those good things. And so that's what we're really going to talk about today, is activating your brand and making sure that people know about it, specifically focusing on digital channels, including social media. So to kind of set the stage, one thing we know is that everyone has an employer brand. This is true whether or not you manage your employer brand, you have one. People out there have opinions, have thoughts about what it's like to work at your company. The difference is that some organizations are really good about controlling that message, and others let people control it for them. And so, that's what kind of the reason for what we're talking about today is that you have a brand and it's in your power to manage that brand.
Yeah, and a lot of what we do online, it's especially important there on the digital channels, because people are on digital channels and social media every day. So whether or not you have a presence there not only affects whether you're controlling the messaging or not, but if you're not controlling the messaging, it can actually be a deterrent and can damage your employer brand, because you're letting somebody else manage that perception and that conversation around who you are. And so it's really important, especially on social channels. A lot of people are afraid of getting involved. They're not sure what to do or how to do it. But it's important to get across that hesitancy and make sure that you're on there and you have a consistent presence and a really robust, thought-out strategy on how to manage your employer brand there.
Yeah, so that's one thing we kind of know to be true. And another thing is that there's a lot of noise out there. Whether you're calling in as someone who works on campus and you're seeing this in person, competing with other companies at career fairs and on campus, or you're someone who works primarily online in sort of a branding role, and you know for a fact that there's competition out there online, or which is probably the majority of you, both of those things, it's really hard to stand out because of all that noise. People, as employers, are communicating a lot of different messages to try and stand out, but really they're just sort of adding to that noise. And in fact, in the U.S. specifically, students are using an average of almost 9 channels to learn about an employer. So this isn't just digital. This includes, career fairs and on campus, but digital plays a large part of that as well. And just to share with you some stats about that, you'll see on the screen just how much information is out there digitally in various channels. These are huge numbers. We're talking millions and billions of people sending millions and billions of messages every single day. So just, again, reiterating that there's a lot going on out there and a lot of information available for people to consume. You'd see the numbers on Facebook are staggering. The numbers online are huge too. This shows that early last year, almost 3 billion people were online. It's actually crossed that this year, so it's over 3 billion in 2015. And what's super interesting about that is that this number is actually growing exponentially. So the first billion people to be online was crossed in 2005. The second billion was crossed 5 years later in 2010. and the third billion was only 4 years later in 2014. So you can imagine a sort of upward growth curve, and just think about, when that next billion is going to be hit. It's likely not going to be 5 years, likely not even going to be 4. It's just a continuous growth every day. And so this is, all great, kind of hard to dispute that there's a lot of information out there. But what about social media specifically for employers?
Yeah, and so this is a question that comes up a lot in conversations. We know that people are online. We know that people spend more time online each day than they do with their own pets. We know that this is where talent is, especially the millennial generation. But is it important for your employer brand? Is it something that is transformative? Is it really a lasting thing, or is it a trend? Is it all about hype, and is it going to fade out? The numbers presenting on the page before definitely show us it's not dying out. If anything, it's growing exponentially. The momentum is gaining, and especially for employer branding, it is growing at the same pace, if not more quickly, and it's definitely relevant for your employer brand. And so just to kind of back that up and give you a little bit of insight into why we say it's important. We did a survey, January 2015, and asked students, where do you seek out information about employer brands, about potential companies that you would work for? 82% of students said that they seek out information about employers through social media channels. Now, some channels, they may be looking, for example, LinkedIn, for a job application. Others, like Facebook or Twitter, they're not necessarily looking for recruitment tools. They're looking for information. They want to learn about who you are as an employer. So 82% of students, that's a lot of people looking to social media to learn about who you are. So the talent definitely is there. The talent definitely wants you to be there.
And this isn't just for the U.S. I know there's people on the phone who've called in from other markets in the Americas and around the world. You can see, Mexico, Brazil kind of leading the charge for the Americas in the top. Argentina is number 1 in the top 5 here. It's spread out across the world.
It's also important to know that employers do see the importance in social media. And so this chart gives us an example of employer brands knowing that digital channels are where they do need to be at now. So for Facebook, we've seen over the years from 2010, 11 employer brands on Facebook to 2014, 141. And that number is continuing to grow. So over 560% growth in the number of employers speaking to talent on Facebook over the last 24 months. So employers are adding to that kind of adds to the noise that we're seeing on social media. So while it is important to be on these channels, that means it's also most important now to know what you're doing on that channel so that you're not adding to the noise as the volume increases, but you're presenting a refined strategy with content that cuts through and actually resonates with talent. So we'll talk a little bit more on how you'll do that in the rest of this presentation. And it's important to make sure that, as you're getting onto these channels now, this is an example of how well people are doing. So the top line here that's dotted, the max individual post engagement, shows us the top performers on Facebook. So these people know what they're doing. Their content is great. They've amassed a large audience. They know how to speak with their audience in a way that gets them engaged. They start liking and commenting and sharing their content. The green line at the bottom is the average, so the global average post engagement. And that big shaded gap is showing us that the difference between the normal person, the average employer brand on Facebook, and those who are doing well, the gap is increasing exponentially, and it's a very large gap. So what that means is that those who are doing the best aren't just doing better, they're doing 100,000 times better. And that's a lot. It's not 100 times better, 100,000 times better. And that means that the employees who are there now are just going to continue getting better because of the algorithms and the way that Facebook kind of rewards you for having a good grasp on what you're audience wants. They don't want to spam their audience. They want people who know how to speak on their channel. So that's rewarded. So if you're getting onto it now, you have a lot of work to do to catch up. And if you're getting on tomorrow, you'll have even more work to do. And so that means it's going to be increasingly difficult for you to compete. So getting on now is important, and knowing what to do once you're there is also crucial. And in the slide previous to this, we talked about employer brands getting onto social channels. We talked about students wanting to seek information about employers on social channels. It's not just students, and it's not just millennials. We found in another recent survey that 29% of experienced hires also use social media as one of their primary tools for job searches and learning about employer brands. So no matter the age group, no matter the demographic, whether you're looking to increase awareness and build engagement around an internship program, or you're looking for an experienced hire in a niche market and channel, there's a lot of an audience out there for you, and there's a lot you can say, and it's about knowing the right things to say.
Great. So we've talked a lot about, why this is important, why it's so hard. We also will talk to you now about what you can do about it, because there are things that you can do about it. But before we do that, we wanted to turn it over to you and actually have a really quick poll about what channels that you're currently using for your employer brand specifically. So you should see pop up on the screen a poll that allows you to vote. You can pick as many as are applicable. And if you could just vote now, it looks like people have kind of just gotten started. We'll give you a couple minutes to complete this, and then we'll share the results back with you. And so we're a little bit limited here with the amount of choices, but if there are other platforms that you're on that we haven't listed out, please write them into the comments, and we'll be curious to hear kind of what new channels people are using. So it looks about half have voted. We'll give you a couple more minutes.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of people are definitely on LinkedIn, which is not surprising at all. LinkedIn is first and foremost an employer branding channel and a recruitment channel. And it looks like a lot of people are also on Facebook, which is promising. A good amount, about half of you are saying you're on Twitter as well, and a little bit less than that on Instagram. Which is about what we expect to see, and some other comments there on YouTube being another channel. This is about what I expected to see. In my experience, most brands are first and foremost on LinkedIn, and then the ones that are kind of steps ahead are already on Facebook and most likely Twitter. And then we're seeing other brands incorporate the kind of new and up and coming channels like Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest, Snapchat. And so it's kind of important to mention here, as we're seeing these, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, these are kind of the core channels where we are seeing most of our employer branding content there. Most employer brands are there now. We're seeing the number grow exponentially. That said, there are other channels. Those other channels with more robust media like YouTube and Instagram and Snapchat. And especially as you get into that further realm of things like Snapchat, there's a lot of caution. People are thinking, well, I mean, Snapchat isn't for companies, it's not for employer brands, and that's absolutely incorrect. Employer brands are now on Snapchat and doing groundbreaking, innovative programs, and people are paying attention to them, and they're actually generating some positive results for them. So years ago when we were saying, why would a company be on Facebook? And we're kind of at that same point now with the new channels. And just the word of caution there is, be open. You don't have to be the first one, certainly, to jump into any new channel. You should definitely gauge what's going to be the best for your brand, because you don't want to have a presence that's too spread out or that's uninformed. You don't want to be everywhere trying to do everything. But you also don't want to close doors to potential opportunities or think that because you're unfamiliar with a channel that it's not meant for your employer brand, because the audience definitely wants to see your content, and they will definitely engage with you there. So once you're on those channels, then it becomes a matter of defining who you are and what you do and how do you say it. So we'll walk through more of that, and in specific, Kat will talk a little bit more about what it means to the biggest audience on these social channels, and that's the Gen Y and millennial audience.
Yeah, so, in addition to kind of knowing that there's a lot of noise out there, this actually is probably a result of all of that. This generation has a big reputation for having low attention span. They're really not going to be digging through tons and tons of information to find an interesting point. More likely, they're actually going to skip over information that they don't find interesting and until they find something that they'll stop at. I mean, if you just think about even yourself, how you kind of interact with your Facebook profile or read the news online even, you're constantly scrolling through and skimming through until something catches your eye. There's enough information out there and enough content out there where you don't need to do that work to find it. The content needs to do the work, and the content needs to be interesting enough to grab your eye, which is why the employers with the best content strategies and the best storytelling perform the best. When we talk about, when we think about what people actually want to learn from this content, we survey students each year about what they find important, and consistently we see that people and culture are coming in as more important than a company's reputation or sort of stats about the company and things like that. This generation really wants to learn about the people and who they're going to be working with on a day-to-day basis and what the work environment's going to be like. This isn't that surprising when you think about your own work and you're thinking about what you like best about your company. A lot of times it is that the people and the right fit, you're sort of the environment that you're in. So even though it's not that surprising, we don't see it coming through as much as it should be in content strategies. Another thing that we just want to point out is this generation really wants to see themselves in your company. They want to be able to put themselves in someone's shoes and feel how it's like to walk around in them. And so, it's less about talking about your brand and more about getting on their level and speaking their language, really showing what it's going to be like for them.
Yeah, and I think we see a lot of companies a little confused on how to do that. So they know, okay, the talent, what's attractive to the talent and what's true about my brand and where that intersects. So we should be talking about how we have exciting products and services and we're a global company. And yeah, you should be talking about those things if that's what's attractive and that's what's credible for your brand. But you should know how to talk about them. So when you're speaking from the brand's perspective and you're saying, we're great, that's not going to resonate as well, especially with today's generations and especially on digital channels. People aren't there to get an advertisement or to get a commercial about your company. They're there to see human content. So if you're innovative or if you're a global company, show in your content what that means to the person. So for the talent, what does it mean to them that you're a global company or that you have exciting products? Find a way to resonate by being human and being purposeful.
Yeah, and just to reiterate that, your people are your biggest asset. So all of the kind of content that you need to be talking about, you have right at your fingertips. They're your coworkers and the people who kind of live and breathe your company every day. So, it's really just about using them and leveraging them in telling different stories about what it's like to work at your company. So a couple ways that we work with companies to do that are quotes about, the benefits of working for your company, getting behind the scenes looks, having a blog, getting advice from top management or thought leadership pieces, photos, kind of celebrating different initiatives with interns and all the contributions they make, as well as video testimonials. I would say it's not as simple as all of this because a lot of companies we see are really content confused, as we say. They're talking about a lot of different things. Kind of in an effort to be everything and to talk about everything, their brand is then getting really diluted. So it's not, it's your people are there, they're your asset, you should use them, but it's not as simple as grabbing the next person who walks by your office and sitting them down for an interview. You really need to be strategic about it and really be data-driven about it. So just a couple of examples of content that we've seen on social media that is not really going to resonate. It's more of just adding to that noise, sort of happy Friday posts, motivational quotes, job postings. We see a lot of that. Amelia said the different channels have different purposes. Facebook is not really meant for job postings, and yet we see a lot of companies, just their entire feed is just straight job postings, without that sort of people-led, data-led content behind it. So all of these examples really lack the sort of stories and lack the human touch that's really important.
Yeah, and those examples also go to show that, maybe these brands are they've taken that first right step. They're on the channel and they're trying to speak consistently. They're trying to post, 3 times a week. They're trying to make sure that they're there and they're present. At the same time, though, you want to make sure that your presence online or an uninformed presence online isn't distracting from who you are as a company. When somebody sees your social feed and they see that you don't really know how to use that channel, that's kind of a negative tick mark on their judgment of you as an employer brand. Show your capability, refine your messaging, make sure you know what you're talking about, you know who you are, and you're leading the audience to discover you and learn more about you. It's there for them to engage with. You do want to make sure you're getting their attention and speaking to things that are important to them, but at the same time, you can't scatter to chase the talent. You do have to still be a leader. So one of the things that we at Universum did, we are definitely data-driven. We're all about knowing, is this true? Is this accurate? What does the market think? What does the talent think? If we're doing something or if we think we're something, is that what's perceived in reality? And if we're activating an employer brand, is it actually having any sort of impact? So one of the things that we learned through our social programs was that most social analytics tools don't provide any feedback on employer branding. In fact, the only one that we found that does is one that we created because we saw that lack. So, it's in social media, it's definitely about engagement. You want to make sure people are liking, sharing, commenting, tagging their friends, redistributing your content and engaging with it. But if they're engaging with your Happy Friday posts, does that mean that they're getting a better understanding of who you are as an employer? Not necessarily. So if your highest engaged posts are a none of the above category, that's a Happy Friday or Happy Holidays, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're winning on social media for your employer brand. So our tool Iris takes into account, just like our survey does, what talent actually thinks. So we feed posts through talent. We actually ask them, based on this framework of attributes that you would associate with an employer brand, what do you think this post is talking about? Do you think that it's talking about innovation or prestige or CSR? What do you think it's talking about? What do you think this brand is trying to say? And so they tell us, they give us their feedback, and it gives us a view of the landscape on social media for employer branding and shows us that when people are talking online about employer brands are scattered in their content. So all of these dots are different attribute topics, value propositions that are important to their employer brand. As you see on the right-hand side, that's where you see most of the little dots, and that's not a good thing. That means that everybody's talking about the same things. It's common content, and perhaps because it's too common and everybody's flooding it with that content, it's not getting a lot of engagement. So you're speaking a lot and you're saying a ton of stuff, but none of it's getting through. Where you want to be is on that top left. You want to get high post engagement on topics that not a lot of people are talking about. So you're differentiating from your competition and people are actually engaging with your content. And you see on the right-hand side, that big gray blob are those Happy Friday posts. So it's very clear on a number of channels that brands are kind of content confused. And this next slide also shows the same kind of trend happening on LinkedIn. While they're getting a relatively higher post engagement on some topics, still everybody's still talking about the same things. So if you do well, if a lot of people like something on LinkedIn, who's to say that they know the difference between your content and your competitor's content talking about the exact same thing? So it's important that you build out a strategy that refines the number of things that you talk about, make sure they're relevant, and make sure you're speaking to them, for example, at the right times. So CSR is one of those big things. Everybody is talking about corporate social responsibility, and everybody tends to talk about it in November and December around the holiday season. So those posts don't typically get high levels of engagement because the feed is flooded with the same kind of content. Everybody's talking about it. It's kind of like you just quick scroll through until you find something else interesting. 1 in 5 posts in 2014 from employer brands were about CSR. So if CSR is something that's a crucial piece of who you are as an employer brand, it's important not to abandon that. Definitely speak to it, but find the ways to speak to it. Find the content that's going to be, stand out and be engaging. And also, use things like Iris to show you, when do I want to talk about this? If everybody's speaking to it in November and December, perhaps I use kind of summer volunteer activities to start that conversation in the summer, where it's going to be a differentiating topic. So, find the topics and then find the timing, and then make sure that the content backs up who you are and speaks in a human and authentic way.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I think something we've seen is being really important is talking about things like innovation, like CSR, like challenging work, without using those sort of buzzwords. It's much more about showing what that really means to you as a company than just saying that you're those things. Because a lot of companies are innovative, for example, but it means very different things at different places. It's important in your communication to really address those differences and make sure that you're talking about what it means for you with the understanding of what it means to your talent as well, what's important to them within those sort of big categories.
Yeah.
So we've been talking a lot about branding, and I think this is just a really good place to clarify. Branding is not the same as recruiting, and especially on social media when we're talking about brand activation. For example, on Facebook, a lot of employers come to us and say, I heard that students don't want to be reached out to on Facebook. Is this a channel I really should be using? That is true, and it's different from being present on Facebook. You need to have good content that's there for consumption, and in a way that builds awareness, builds engagement without being intrusive. So there's a difference between reaching out to someone with an unsolicited message and just having great content that they can access when they want to and when it's right for them. Just wanted to kind of point out that distinction. That being said, branding is still important for recruiting. It's an important step in the process in order to make sure that you're ultimately then getting the right people into your organization when the time's right.
Yeah. And so to kind of talk about, now that you are looking at joining the channel, you're on the channel, you know that you need to have authentic human stories that are going to resonate. How do you do that? So we talked a little bit before about making sure you know what's relevant for talent, what's attractive to them, what's true about your brand internally. That's vital because every time somebody logs into Facebook, there are 1,500 posts queued up in their newsfeed. So if you're constantly talking about something else, trying to chase what's attractive to the talent, you're going to appear scattered. You're not going to be noticed. But if every time they log in and every time they see something from you, it reinforces the same 3 to 5 core things about your employer brand, you're going to have a stronger recognition. You're going to have a stronger presence. So make sure you're not just factoring in what's true for you or what's attractive for talent, that you understand where that intersection is and what's going to work best at that intersection. And then you definitely have to, once you get to that intersection, decide who you want to be in a way that differentiates you. There are 20 million businesses out there vying for the attention of these people, and if you're talking about the exact same things, while they may be attractive and true and credible, it's not going to differentiate you. So make sure you know who do you want to be? Who is your competition? What are they talking about? And can you talk about the same things in a different way, or should you be talking about something else? So that's also a vital step there. And then once you have that, look for the real and unique stories. People want to connect and learn what it's like. They want to see an inside view and get a behind the scenes story. They want to hear about a CEO who's had a long journey there. If you want to show them that, having a chance for a career, a long-term opportunity there and career development, that's the kind of thing that will reinforce that value, but tell it in an authentic and human way so that it's not a brand speaking to them, it's a person. And once you have those stories and you know what kind of stories you need to tell, build out a content plan. Most people forget that just because social media is fluid and dynamic and you can kind of tailor your strategy as you go better than other traditional channels, you should still have a plan. You should still stick with a foundational strategy and make sure you stick it out long enough to see which elements are going to work best or not. You'll tailor things along the way, like changing out a different image or a different call to action, changing out some copy. But you don't want to kind of re-steer your boat every time you hit a little road bump. So plan out a content calendar, look into when is the best time to post, and also know that you need to be posting frequently. Maybe 7 posts a week is going to inundate and add to the noise, so you don't want to overdo it, but you don't want to do, one of the most common things I see is I'll look at a company's news feed or feed on Facebook, and then I see 4 posts in March 2015, 4 posts in April 2015, and nothing, and then August 2015, another post. It's kind of like, where did they go? It's not like it requires a physical presence. It's not a lot of money to invest to make sure you have a constant voice there. So it's important that you do that. And when you are absent, it's definitely noticed. And not just in their news feeds, but when they do something like search for your careers Facebook and they see your page all at once. That hole is almost the same as a big gap in somebody's resume. It's kind of a killer.
On top of that, that hole in that absence is being filled by your competitors while you're not there. And so it's just another reason you need to kind of be proactive rather than reactive.
Certainly. And also know that you should be responding. So the goal is to generate engagement. You want those big metrics. You want the numbers. You want people commenting, liking, and sharing. What do you do with that, though? The end goal isn't just those numbers. You need to make sure that you're transitioning it into a conversation that's going to leave an impact and create relationships that will make a difference for your employer brand and your recruitment efforts. So respond quickly in 24 hours or less. Make sure you're using the right tone. It is social media, so you do need to approach it with a slightly less formal tone, but you don't want to show up and say, hey, what's up? You need to still be a professional presence and lead in being that, but you don't want to kind of take an encyclopedia to a digital channel either. And one of the biggest kind of no-nos I see is people copying and pasting. Thank you for your comment. Please see our list of job postings. That kind of just is a buzzkill, especially on social channels. Somebody saw some dynamic content from you, they're interested, so they comment back and they get a flat response. They'll certainly look to another brand where they can further engage. And so all of that too, once you've got it all in place, or even before you have it all in place, it's important to stick with the goal. So that foundational level of strategy, make sure that it's framed around reaching a certain goal or a set of goals. It is about generating engagement, but what does that engagement actually do for your employer brand? Especially for those who have internal teams and they have a boss to take the results to at the end of the quarter or end of the year. What is social media doing for us? Why should we be investing in it? It's not because you're getting likes, comments, and shares. You have to have a goal that resonates and that translates into your business bottom line or your recruitment efforts. You have to have the goal and make sure it's consistent and set it and make sure your strategy is always tied back to it. That's one of the most important things that leads to the content confusion and leads to the extra noise because people do lose sight of those goals. And so I put together a couple of examples of how we've worked with companies to frame those goals and make sure that they are constantly speaking to them. And they can be anywhere from recruitment to just general awareness. So this is an example of a company who wanted to generate awareness around a specific job type and with a specific demographic of millennials. So they asked for contributions from talent who wants to join internships potentially in the future, but it's not directly engaging them to apply for an internship. It's just asking them, show us how you support innovation. How are you an innovator? Our brand is innovative. Show us how that's you. So they developed content, and we worked with them to develop it. And the program actually gave them additional content to further use in other internal and external activation programs to really just build the awareness of who they are as an innovative brand. And then there are other ones that are more refined and targeted. So if you have recruitment efforts, that awareness can also contribute to the recruitment efforts. You don't just want to post a job posting or apply for this training program. You want to give information about that program. Inform them on who the brand is, who you are, what you're like as an employer, and then nurture them into that funnel of applying. But don't just kind of stick the job posting up and hope that somebody likes it.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, we mentioned earlier in sort of talking about storytelling and different ways you can do it, it sort of runs the gamut from intern to management level, being that sort of voice for you. I think this is a really good example of how even that is a really intentional choice. So this company, wanting to promote its internship and trainee program, featuring someone from that sort of audience and really speaking directly to them, being really intentional with that goal in mind.
Yep. And so this is just kind of a breakdown of what we've been talking about, but there are a lot of ways, we've broken it down pretty simply. There are some key things that you can do to make sure that you supercharge your employer brand on social channels and you're not just adding to the noise. Things like employee ambassadors and having attributes, knowing the key things that are true about your brand and attractive talent and differentiating. But there are other things you can do. Social media is there are dynamic tools there for you. So, once you generate the engagement, having those conversations are important. There are also ways that you can, refine your targeting, expand your reach, sponsor content so you can guarantee it's seen by certain audiences. There are a number of tools out there and a number of ways you can work with social media to make sure that it's not just a vague, we want to support awareness, but that you have actual numbers to back up the difference that it's making for your employer brand. So you can actually set KPIs and gauge from the beginning to the end of the program the difference that you've made.
Yeah, and so I think we've been laying it out, hopefully with the message that, it's simple in essence. You have all the tools you need, but you do need to be strategic about it and have a strategy in order to make an impact. There is a lot involved. It's simple, but it's complicated at the same time. There's a lot going on. And so we're actually curious as we're wrapping up to hear from you about what sorts of resources your company is dedicated to this at this moment. So the first kind of another quick poll being who primarily manages your social media? Is it a dedicated in-house person, one person, a dedicated team, another in-house team, so not social media, but corporate marketing or HR marketing, a third-party agency or something else that you can specify then in the question box again. Just to get a sense for kind of what sorts of resources are being put towards this.
Yeah, and with the clients that we work with, we see a big range. Not all companies have the ability to have an in-house team, let alone even one person. Sometimes companies have a person in HR who's both managing, general HR or HR recruitment and as well as social media efforts. And some don't have any dedicated resources, and so they look to Universum or other companies to help them, manage their social presence, build a strategy around it. So we do see, and it's looking like through the poll, we see a good mix of that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's looking like almost evenly split, kind of among them all. A lot of you have another in-house team or a dedicated social media person, and some are using third-party agencies and other. So yeah, it's definitely a mix, and it's important, whether you have a full team, whether you have one person, whether you're using a third party, that you are actively managing a presence, that you aren't just kind of letting it sit because you think that you don't have the resources, you don't have the personnel, or you don't have the budget. So I guess that's our next poll question, is we want to kind of get a feel also for, how much does your company invest in activating your employer brand on digital channels each year, whether that's through any of those previous poll responses, an in-house team members, or a third party.
Again, this is really going to depend on kind of your industry, even your the size of your company, your sort of goals and priorities. But we're really just kind of curious to get a sense of what sorts of attention, what sorts of resources are being dedicated to this right now.
Yeah, and we see with our clients, it is just like I'm seeing here in the poll results, kind of all over the place. Some have a bigger budget, some have a smaller budget. And it looks like a lot of people, we're almost evenly split there.
You can share that back with everyone now.
Yeah. And it's important to know too, like, no matter your budget, no matter your personnel, that social channels, luckily, it's free to sign up for Facebook. It's free to sign up for Twitter. It's not, necessarily a one-person job to manage a robust employer branding strategy and execute it on social channels. But for that reason, we're seeing that 65% of companies that we've surveyed plan to increase their social media spending across the next 5 years. So for those of you who don't have a lot of budget, maybe there's hope for you in the future that your company is going to start reallocating things because of the prevalence of employer branding on these channels. And for those who, whether you have a big budget or not, like we said, it's a constant struggle. Some people don't have anybody. Some people are looking for ways to outsource it and not have to dedicate staff members internally. And there are ways, no matter the situation, to make sure that you're still present and you're ever active there, and that you have at least some sort of strategy. And I think that's one of the key takeaways is it's not something that's impossible to do. It's not something that's easy or that shouldn't be carried with weight, but it's something that's important.
Yeah, it just goes back to kind of the very first point we talked about. Someone is going to be controlling your employer brand. It's kind of up to you whether that's going to be you or whether you're going to let that sort of noise take over and let that be controlled externally.
So to just wrap up a bit, some key takeaways. Make sure once you're on these channels to use the data and create a strategy and some messaging that's going to cut through. Plan your content out. Make sure you're sticking with that strategy. Tailor it where necessary, but don't lose sight of your end goals. Be ready for conversations, because these channels are about conversations. And make sure when you start those conversations that you're speaking authentically. And focus on what matters, and that's, the people. Because people make up your brand as an employer, people who are trying to speak to. So don't lose sight of that.
Great. So we are going to stick around for a Q&A session, but before we do, just wanted to get some feedback from those of you on the line. We always like to just kind of do a little pulse check, make sure that what we're sharing is what you had hoped to hear. So if you could first just answer how helpful, how relevant did you find this webinar? If you could just share that. And, as always, if you have qualitative feedback as well, if there's a certain topic or point that you wish that we talked more about, please put that into the questions, because we do take the feedback and kind of put it into planning as we're doing these in the future. So looks about half of you have voted. We'll give you a couple more minutes. All right. And then one more question, just if you're interested in this topic, is this something you'd like to be hearing more about? We always are happy to kind of continue the conversation offline and talk with you about your specific needs. Amelia is always available to jump on a call, as well as myself. So if this is something you'd be interested in learning more about or chatting with us about at a later date, please let us know. Again, specific topics are always welcome. If you have something to specify, just put that in the comments as well. Okay, we'll give one more minute to finish voting, and then we'll take some questions. So if you are still on the line and have some questions, just type them into the question box. A couple came through during the webinar that we can go through, and we're always open to additional ones coming through now. One question that we get all the time is whether the content will be shared afterwards. And so, yeah, just wanted to clarify that we'll be sending this out. It's being recorded. We'll send this out afterwards so that if it looks like most people stuck around, but if there are people who kind of dropped off after we were interrupted or want to share this with your coworkers, we'll have the recording for you. Okay, great. So I guess we can go to questions now. One came in earlier just asking about additional channels, in addition to Facebook, channels like Glassdoor, like Instagram. What do we think of those?
Yeah, that's a good question and one that I get a lot. So I did talk earlier about the importance of not discrediting channels, but also not jumping too quickly into them. One of the other things to take into account is the nature of the channels. So a lot of people, the immediate question when I talk with HR professionals, recruiting professionals is, what about LinkedIn and Glassdoor? A lot of the content here was about Facebook, and while these strategies can be deployed similarly across a number of different channels, a lot of them want to focus on Glassdoor and LinkedIn because they are meant for employers. They're meant for recruitment. But they are just that. They are meant for recruitment. So if you kind of think about the journey that somebody would take, you learn about somebody's as an employer through a number of different channels, whether it's they came to your campus or you see an ad and you think, oh, that sounds like a good company. I like their products. Maybe they're cool to work for. Or you've heard something, you saw something in the Wall Street Journal, you saw something on Facebook. You're learning about who they are and through those channels. Once you have a general knowledge and awareness and you've got some level of interest, that's when we see them funneling into the channels like Glassdoor and LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, we see people going there. They don't scroll through their LinkedIn newsfeed like they do Facebook. The audience just isn't there yet. And in future years, it may be, but it's definitely a different kind of format, a different tone. So people look to see who you are as a human employer on other channels, and people look to see what your official employer stance is on those bigger official formal channels like LinkedIn. And then they, let's say they've applied for a job via LinkedIn. Then they go to Glassdoor to see what do other people say about their interview experience or working there or the salaries there. They want to get feedback on Glassdoor from other people just like them who are giving candid answers to the questions that they want to know. So just make sure that it's not a one channel answer. You should definitely be employing multiple channels, and make sure that you consider all the factors in what that channel's meant for and what the audience uses those channels for.
Okay, great. Another question is for sort of highly regulated industries like banking as the example, do you have any advice for people entering social media there?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's a tough one in that highly regulated industries are definitely more cautious of channels, digital channels and social media because they are less formal. It's harder to control the messaging there. Even not as regulated industries, but industries that have a lot of criticism maybe in the public eye, they're hesitant to be on the social channels because of the feedback they might get. It might be negative. Avoiding a channel because of regulations or the potential for negative feedback is something you definitely don't want to do. The negative feedback is going to exist whether you're there or not, so it's better to be there to control it. And in the highly regulated industries like financial and banking, there's a balance. There's a way to make sure that you're meeting the red tape guidelines, the brand requirements, but you can still be a personal human brand. A bank is a bank, but there are still humans that work there. So I think even for those highly regulated industries, it is maybe even more important for them to show a human side.
I'm going to combine a couple that came in around a sort of similar theme of KPIs. So talking about, are there specific KPIs that we would recommend? And specifically, someone asked about, what KPIs can you use to show the importance of this investment to leadership to really get that buy-in? Because engagement doesn't necessarily translate to hires, which is definitely a fair point.
So that's kind of the primary reason why in a lot of the conversations I focus on Facebook, because Facebook offers the most robust, currently most robust ability to kind of tailor who you're reaching out to, especially through their sponsored posts. You can filter things based on, sex, where they live, where they went to school, what year they graduated, if they're still currently in school, what they're studying. You can even filter on their online habits, like what do they like? Do they typically like things that talk about this, or do they typically like things that talk about something else? So it gives you a lot of room to both expand your reach by specifying, I want to reach more people like this and create lookalike audiences, or refine it by saying, I only want to reach this specific kind of person with this specific kind of interest. So setting KPIs, there's maybe setting that you want to make sure your post is seen by a certain number of people, or that once it's seen, that based on the number of people seeing it, you're getting a certain percentage of engagement off of that. So there are a number of different ways you can set those KPIs. Whether it's the engagement side of things, or generating new fans, or ensuring that your content isn't just being liked and commented on, but shared. So one of the biggest assets is having your audience share your content with other people. It's definitely an informal kind of endorsement, and when somebody on your, say a friend on your timeline endorses a company's post, you're more likely to trust the content in that post because it came from a friend, not the company. So there are a lot of different ways, and we'd be happy to follow up in an offline conversation and talk about more specific KPIs that might, be of use for maybe your specific initiatives.
Great. So it's just about 1:30, so I think we'll end it here. If you, again, like Amelia said, if you do have other questions that we didn't get to today, or want to continue the conversation, we'd be more than happy to have that conversation. We'll follow up with all of you with the content and with our contact information so that we can keep the conversation going. But yeah, again, thanks so much from myself and from Amelia for joining today, and we hope to hear from you all soon.